always nice to be here in person. See a fair number of people on our morning Zoom calls here, which is nice. But actually being in person is a lot better. So today we'll talk about respect and how that plays a role in Buddhist practice and in a life of Dhamma, in a life that we're trying to live skillfully. And why is this important? Because I think in many people's mind, respect is, it's not something you maybe think about much, or it's possibly something that just happens or is compelled upon you, something that's talked about in school, but maybe not something we give much attention to in our daily lives. So it's good to pay attention to it and see how it can inform our practice and even ground and bring our practice to a more heart center. And this is important because meditation can be a practice for respect, and respect can be a practice for meditation. And what I mean by that is what you do on the cushion informs and shapes what you do off the cushion. And when you're paying attention to one object, learning how to come back to the breath or come back to a sensation in the body, come back to a sentiment, this sense of well-being, coming back again and again, even though the mind runs off, because that's what a mind does. We respect these different qualities, respect these different phenomena in the body, these different values. We hold them dear, and then that transfers. We're doing it on the cushion, but then when we leave the cushion, we've been training the same muscle that is then able to hear our spouse when they want to give us bad news or want to give us some kind of feedback. It helps us listen to our teachers or our friends. And similarly, when you have this overarching value of respect, I want to be able to listen respectfully and hear what other people have to say and let people have this sense of safety around me. When you do that in your daily life, it is the same muscle as when you come down to meditation, when you're valuing harmlessness, valuing compassion, valuing something other than only what I want to say in this moment, or only what I want to believe or value in this moment, but I can actually widen my perspective and value and listen to and respect the people around me, the people who I care about in one's life. So respect trains meditation, and meditation trains respect. So that's why it's worth paying attention to. So the quote that I started this off with in Pali is Dukkhaṃ ko agaravo viharati apatiso. It's a beautiful quote, and it means one without respect, one who doesn't know how to listen, dwells in suffering. The usual translation is one without respect, without reverence, dwells in suffering. But this word for reverence, apatiso, literally means one who doesn't know how to listen, not being able to listen. And this was said by the Buddha. The story behind it is really beautiful. It was just after the Buddha had attained enlightenment in Bodhi. So maybe just a quick show of hands. You don't have to open your eyes if you've got your eyes closed, but who here has been to Bodhi, India? All right, good. That's great. But if you haven't been there, no worries, because it was a very different place at the time of the Buddha. You go these days, and there's got Tibetan monks who are like doing full-length prostrations all around you, and bells, and sound systems, and then smaller sound systems, and then like sub-sound systems, and everybody's got their own speaker, and a lot of noise, a lot of movement all around you. But at the time of the Buddha, this was a fairly secluded forest, this Bodhi grove, this Bodhi tree that he was at. And there were people who he would occasionally see after he attained enlightenment, but mostly he was by himself. So he attains enlightenment, lets out this earthquake of goodness into the world. But then he sits there by the Bodhi tree for, it says, about 7 weeks. So he's not fully sitting. He's doing walking meditation and other things, but doing a lot of sitting meditation. And at one point, this is the reflection that comes to him spontaneously. So meditation isn't a state totally of non-thinking. Being able to train in that skill, learning how to incline away from the mind that has to think is a good skill to give weight to. But you don't have to be a slave to thinking. You don't have to be a slave to all of the perpetual thoughts that are going on in your head. So the Buddha had a spontaneous thought that comes up, and this was it. Say, one without respect, who doesn't know how to listen, without reverence, dwells in suffering. What could I give respect to? And then he gives it some thought, and he says, people typically take on an object of respect if they're looking to train in a particular area, because that's what you take on a teacher, or you look towards something in your life, you look towards the things that you care about, you give time to these things because you want to grow in those things. So the Buddha says someone would respect something because they want to grow in undeveloped virtue, but actually my virtue is already fully developed. So what do I do now? So someone would respect somebody to grow in concentration or meditation, to get better in their meditation, but says he's actually really good at meditation already. So similarly, one would respect somebody, go to a teacher because they want to practice release or wisdom or knowledge and vision of release. But similarly, the Buddha's already perfected these things. So the next thought was, what if I respect and take dependence upon this Dhamma, this very Dhamma, and dwell with respect and deference and know how to listen to this very Dhamma? And as soon as he had that thought, the Brahma god Sahampati, so this is in the Buddhist cosmology or worldview, this is the same god who, when Kate did the invitation to the Dhamma talk, this Brahma Chaloka Dipati Sahampati, that's the voice. This is the Brahma god Sahampati, who earlier from this story had come down to the Buddha and requested that he teach. Please, Buddha, come and teach for the benefit of for benefit of people. And he's sticking around. He's still paying attention to what the Buddha's doing in these weeks after he's attained enlightenment. And he comes back again and he says, as soon as the Buddha has this thought that one without respect, who doesn't know how to listen, without deference, dwells in suffering, he comes down, and it's said that he puts his robe over one shoulder. It's interesting that God would have a robe on, but he does that, and he lifts his hands up like this in Anjali, as people do in Buddhist circles, and he says, Etamatang Bhagava, Etamatang Sugata, which is usually translated as, so it is, Blessed One, so it is, Venerable Sir. I kind of imagine that similar to like when I was in high school. You do something that's really cool, and all your friends are like, yeah, that's my boy, that's my boy. So like that's how I imagine Brahma Sahampati heard this, and he was just like, yes, that is so true. And Brahma Sahampati continues. He says, yes, so it was in the past. All the Buddhas who attained enlightenment in the past had this same thought. All the Buddhas who will attain enlightenment in the future have had this same thought. And you yourself, in this same tradition, have had this same thought, that one without respect, without deference, who doesn't know how to listen to others, dwells in suffering. And so he delights, and then he disappears, because that's what the gods do sometimes. So just a beautiful, beautiful story, and a really fascinating sentiment. Like what does that mean? And why would the Buddha, the Buddha was totally free from all mental suffering. So why would he look for something to pay respects to? Isn't he, and it said he takes dependence on the Dhamma. Why would he have to do that if he's already enlightened and free from dukkha? So it's a good thing to think about. In Buddhist contexts, generally we take objects for reference, reverence and reference as three. So the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So with regards to the Buddha, we've got the historical Buddha, and we've got just the internal Buddha. So the external Buddha, this is Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha in that story, the Buddha in the Tripitaka, who attained enlightenment 2,500 years ago, who is kind of symbolized in these wood statues, stone statues, metal statues, all the statues that we will bow to. That's the external Buddha, which, yeah, we can pay respects to as a symbol for this internal Buddha, which is awareness. I was going back to travel to visit my dad last year, and he lives in Michigan. So I was flying through Michigan, and it was going to be a couple hours before he could pick me up. So I was just waiting around in the airport, and probably most of the time, you've seen this if you've been through an airport, is like a meditation room or a some kind of prayer room. And I'd never stopped in before. I always feel a little bit bad when I kind of walk by him as a monk. I feel like people behind me, are kind of disappointed that the monk doesn't go in the meditation room. But I never had been in one of these before. But I was like curious, and I had 2 or 3 or some number of hours to spend, and I'm like, oh, I should go check this out. And it always looked beautiful. The sign is always beautiful that says meditation room, temple, whatever. And I think in my mind I had images of vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows and maybe like choir boys singing softly in the background or something. But you walk down this hall, at least in Detroit. Hopefully our friend, our board member Steve, is on the board helping to get the meditation room in the Seattle airport up and working. So I hope you do better than Detroit. But this Detroit one, as you're walking down the hall towards the meditation, quote unquote, meditation, relaxation room, it becomes more and more uninspiring. You're kind of losing faith as you walk down this hall. It becomes less and less, there's all this beautiful art, or at least interesting or art, as you see in the main terminals, and then you go down this hall and you're passing bathrooms, and then you keep going down into this other room and you're passing mops that are still wet, and going by and passing air conditioning systems, and then you find this door that says meditation hall on it, and you go inside, and it's this kind of dirty room, and no windows, and there's a guy sleeping in the corner, and not so inspiring, but someone had given precedence to giving respect to this idea of a place of quietude. And something I was impressed with in this room was that there were arrows on the walls for pointing towards Mecca. And I imagine most of these meditation or contemplation rooms do this as well, pointing towards Mecca. And why they do this, for people who don't know, is that in Islam, one of the main pillars of Islam is that 5 times a day you bow in the direction of Mecca to this holy site. And I thought it was beautiful. While I was in there for 2 hours or so, I think the guy who was sleeping got up and left. But probably like 5 or 6 people or more came in and bowed towards Mecca. It was a really beautiful thing to see. And I was thinking that's beautiful, to stop one's day, even if you're in an airport, you're going somewhere, to stop, to recollect what's most important for you, what has most Gārava. So that's the other word. So apatissa is literally being able to hear, but respect is Gārava, or without respect is agārava. Gara literally means weight. The root is weightiness. So when we did the guided meditation together, you can train in this. What is it that gives your body ballast? What is it that is the foundation of your meditation? What is the gravity? What can you give attention to? Gravitational force and weight, and what do you respect? What do you give weight to? So it's a beautiful word, and I think a really useful concept for the tiered nature. When you bring up issues of respect, it automatically brings up a tiered system. And this is something in America, many people in certain Dhamma circles don't like bowing. And if that's you, no pressure at all. I certainly was weirded out with all the people bowing when I started going to meditation places, and no pressure at all. There's no inherent worth in putting your head like on the ground and doing like everybody else is doing. And yeah, it can seem weird. What am I lowering myself down to? Aren't we all created equal? And what is this bowing to this wooden statue? Like, don't understand it. It can be a little bit provocative for people. And I think what lies behind that is an understandable and true truth about the world, that all people are created equal. But this can become pathological. This can become dangerous when it turns into like radical equalism. So everything or every mental state, if you kind of opt into this everything being equal, then you lose your bearing, you lose your direction. You have no mecca, you have no directionality to your life and to your practice. Everything's equal, so why would I do anything? Why would I speak kindly, listen to this other person, when I could just do whatever else I want to do, which is exactly equal to anything else? So why don't I just do what I want to do and not do what you want to do or anybody else? So this radical equalism can become dangerous, because it's not the case that all of our voices, inner voices, are always the most intelligent. And if you have a particular goal, if you want to get somewhere, if you want to get to Mecca, if you want to get to Bodh Gaya, then you have to go in a particular direction. Every road doesn't lead to Mecca. Every path doesn't lead to Bodh Gaya. And if your goal is awakening, to be present and to be harmless and to be able to listen and be alive in the present moment rather than reactive and just compelled by all of your past habits, then the Buddha, that's what the Dhamma is for, is giving precedence, outweighing certain mental states like loving kindness and like stillness and care and attention and basically everything you find in the Buddhist canon, all of these good mind states, precedenting those, giving those priority, giving those more weight than other things which pull you away and pull you off of your center. Just as an aside, there's a really cool app. This is true. It's called Bodh Gaya Finder. And it's an app, and you can download it. And it is a compass which finds your phone's inner directionality, and it will point you in the direction of Bodh Gaya. So this is not one of the pillars of Buddhism that you have to bow towards Bodh Gaya 5 times a day. But if you wanted to, get this app, and you can. So, and I did it this morning. Bodh Gaya is that way. So, which is a little bit hard when we're doing the bowing. Like, do we bow to Bodh Gaya or the Buddha statue? And on some level, these are just conventions. So what we're bowing to is our internal qualities. So it doesn't matter on one level. But if you wanted to orient your life, orient your house, orient your room, Ajahn you might be meditating, but you'll just be happy to know that your shrine is in the direction of Bodh Gaya. So, yeah. This is a way that we can orient our lives. But this inner refuge, this inner Buddha, is really what's more important. So what is that? On one level, you can take it as the mantra. So many people have this mantra of Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, of I take refuge in the Buddha, or just Buddho, which means awakening. And that is pointing you, every time you use that mantra, to this inner state of knowing, of presence, of awareness. And if you value that, it'll take you a long way. Experiment. If you have any inclination to practice with a mantra, check it out. It might be fun. So that's another way to recollect and give weight to the Buddha. The Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, you'll find in Thailand and other Buddhist countries, this whole idea of weight or the height or um, uh, the spatial metaphor of how you orient your life and the things in your house is taken to a very refined degree. So the Dhamma is metaphorized. It's kind of lives in the Tripitaka, the teachings of the Buddha. So you'll find in Thai monasteries that the Tripitaka, the shelf where all the books of the Buddha's words, they're someplace high. So this is a principle you can take into your own life if you wanted to. Put the books of the canon someplace high in your house, not someplace that's like super low, just like, relating to the Buddhist teachings like in a really casual way. It's not such a thing in the Thai forest tradition, but in Chinese monasteries, they won't put Dhamma books on the floor. And no pressure if your book is on the floor. But they'll definitely, if you, even as a monk, you have like a lot of years in robes and you think you're something special. But if you put your book on the floor, somebody's going to come up and they're going to fix you and they're going to put your book on someplace higher. So again, you don't have to do these things, but they're symbolic of how you orient your life and how you're placing your surroundings. So Ajahn Jeff, in one of his teachings, talks about how it's a really beautiful teaching, I think, called Opening the Doors of the Dhamma, Respect in the Buddha's Discourses or something like that. He talks about how respect is really an embodiment of right view. So on one level, we can't know, are we the owners of our karma? Do we have any, is there any sense that, we have free will, or is the world totally random, or are we totally controlled by a god, or what is it? On some level, we can't actually know. All of these worldviews could be falsified, but what the Buddha does is actually say, from his experience, that there is a right view, and it is that it's a paradox that we are the owners of our karma. So there is a level of free will. We do have choice in our lives, but to a big extent, there's also this truth of not self. So we don't have full control. We can't always control everything. So when we bow, or when we place certain things high and do all these other gestures of respect, we're bowing to this principle of right view, that we can choose to some extent what we're doing in the present moment. We're choosing to meditate. We're choosing to use this mantra. We're choosing to pay attention to the breath, choosing to come back into our bodies, choosing to come back to the felt sense of our bodies on the floor. But on another level, it's not totally, everything isn't under our control. So respect as an embodiment of right view is something to look into. The final aspect of a Buddhist object of respect is the Sangha, which is the community of practitioners. It's all of us who practice together, who try to live the teachings and embody the teachings. And there's an inner Sangha and an outer Sangha. And the outer Sangha, it's when we come together like this and give communal weight. All of us are sitting together quietly because we value the same things. Outside of this room, you've got people who are lawn mowing and other stuff. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on outside of this room. But all of us within here, we're valuing the same thing, and it's precious. It's unique, and it's beautiful, and it heartens, and it gives ballast to our own weighting of this quality, these teachings. When we come together this way, it uplifts the heart in a way which we can't always do when we're just sitting alone sometimes. So foregrounding this, one aspect which is really good is of Sangha is just feedback. What is Sangha? Sangha is feedback in a certain way. So we're hearing from the people around us about the things that we do wrong. We're getting feedback constantly. whether spoken or unspoken, and learning how to relate to feedback skillfully and respectfully is a really essential skill. And while it is true that training in respect is a training in meditation, and training in meditation is a training in respect, there are specific gestures and specifics of the outer etiquette of respect, the outer language of respect, which we have to learn. So, as monks, one of our rules is disrespect is to be confessed. So this is a pretty big principle, and that means one particular thing in for us as monks, but it's something to reflect on. As what if you took that on as a principle of, okay, you're taking the 5 precepts. I'm not going to kill. I'm not going to steal. I'm not going to do sexual misconduct. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to take intoxicants. But what if I also took on this training of not being disrespectful? And that's interesting. What does that do to your life? And it's good to hold that one lightly. It's harder to put your finger on exactly what are the expressions of disrespect than it is to say if I've lied. But to explore that, say to train in not being disrespectful, then there's a lot of mindfulness to be gained from that. So I hope that all of this talk on respect and on valuing and weighting certain things in life and in practice over others, it's not at all compulsory. That's one of the beautiful things about the Buddha's practice, is that there's no real compulsion. Even the precepts, they're all trainings. Say, I undertake personally the training to refrain from killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, intoxicants. But it's not a commandment. It's not something that anybody else is making you do. And similarly with the bowing and everything else, no pressure at all. And hopefully all of us can be extremely open to, because I think most of us, if we didn't grow up in a Buddhist country, or maybe even if we did, this stuff is weird. This Buddhist stuff is weird when you first come to it. So giving space to ourselves, to our own practices, and to everybody else. And maybe someone else here won't ever bow, and that's totally fine. Maybe we ourselves won't ever bow or do this kind of Buddhist Anjali hand thing. And that's totally fine. The Buddha didn't say that was essential. But experiment and see if doing these outer gestures might have an effect on your meditation and in your life. So leave things there, and we can open it up. Okay, so open things up to questions. And we do have Cheryl's running the mic. Yeah, John, please.
Hi, I'm John. Is this on? Oh, it's on. Okay. So I had a question about gossip. It seems there's times where it's okay to maybe talk about, if there's a problem you have to solve and you have to talk about others, but generally gossip was seen by the Buddha as being unskillful most of the time, right? And so I guess the temptation is, like, is it okay to gossip if you leave the names out? They're anonymous. Or is that still unskillful, and why?
Yeah. Anyone have a problem with this one? Raise your hand. Yeah. The 4th precept is musawada. Basically, the 4th precept in Buddhism, a training precept for the sake of the calm mind and the path, is to refrain from lying. But you'll see in the translation, there's a little bit of English added, false and harmful speech. And the Buddha does speak about 4 kinds of generally unskillful speech. So there's lying, there's harsh speech, there's idle chatter, sampapalapa. It's the most fun Pali word to say, one of them. And then there is gossip, divisive tale-bearing. And the thing is, the Buddha doesn't actually, the precept isn't against all four, actually. We kind of add a little bit onto that English translation in some books. Lying in the Buddhist worldview is never skillful. There's, and to develop that precept, you have to develop as a skill. You have to learn to, because there's certain times where you shouldn't say everything on your mind or everything that's true. So you do have to become skilled at when and how much truth you speak at any given point. But in the Buddhist worldview, it's never skillful to lie. And there's a real power to that. There's a power to being with someone where you can ask them face to face, did you cheat on me? And they say no, and you know that you can trust that completely and totally. The other forms of generally unskillful speech, though, there are times when it's actually appropriate, which is why there's not a precept against them. So harsh speech, there's times when a teacher might have to speak quite harshly to prevent a student from meditating in a way that will lead to psychosis. I know Longpo Pasano's had to do that before, really kind of make them listen. There's times when idle chatter is quite important, actually. It's like grease on the bike chain. So you need a certain amount of idle chatter when you go home or when you're with people just to make things flow. But then you'll notice when there's too much and your hands get all gummy with it. And similarly, there's a time for divisive tale-bearing when there's genuinely something that someone needs to be told about a dangerous person or an issue. But I think, and that's why there's not a precept against it, but I think the way you can work with that is by putting really clear boundaries around that and saying, look, I usually don't say things like this, but I think I need to tell you this one thing. And then you say it, and then you are done. And I think that issue of gossip is perhaps one of the most potent places of all to work on in terms of our practice. Like, there are a few instances where you can just do what I said, but most of the time, try not to speak about others. And I think especially holding that within this community where we can just trust that we won't talk about each other. So yeah, there are times when it can be necessary, but rarely, I'd say. I think we had Samek next.
Hello. So the Dhamma talk about respect as a whole, like, it made me think about, I don't know if anyone's listened to this speech. It's called like "This Is Water" by David Foster Wallace. And it's generally about the theme of how everyone has unconsciously something that they're worshiping, something that they quote unquote respect. And the speech is about how university and college as a whole gives us the tools to think and to contemplate those things, to bring it to consciousness. And for me, like, to be respectful of something, to worship something, you kind of have to do the work to understand it first. And I wanted to ask, like, I guess, like, for you guys, to respect something, like, what is, like, how, I guess, like, how would you do that? And what is the place for contemplation and thinking and trying to understand that thing in the act of trying to respect the Buddha, like the inner Buddha, the outer Buddha, like virtues as a whole, and all these like wholesome mind states that we're trying to cultivate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Bob Dylan's got a song called "You Got to Serve Somebody," and it might be an older gospel song, but it's really true. I mean, everybody, you're serving someone. You're operating from views about the universe and the world that, if they're not conscious, they might be unconscious. They are unconscious, and if you're not conscious about what you're respecting, it's possible you're respecting laziness. In the Buddhist, there's this same word, Gārava. Talks about people who respect the Dhamma, and there are people who respect wealth. or people who respect status, or people who respect money, or people who respect anger and don't respect the Dhamma. So you're very right about, we're operating from these underlying perceptions and assumptions about things. So it's good to make it conscious. But you're also very right that, and I think this is why, for any of us, absolutely myself included, it makes sense that something will have to earn our respect. But once you realize that I'm respecting something, even if I'm not conscious of it, you really want to choose what to pay respects to. And so no diss on anybody who is not yet comfortable paying respects to the Buddha. That's exactly where study comes in. Like, is the Buddha, is the Dhamma, is the Sangha worthy of my respect? Because what if they're not? And what if I start bowing to these things and lifting my hands up and putting things on high shelves and it turns out it's harmful to myself and others? Then aren't I aiming in a bad direction? There's absolutely a place for study, but really being intentional about that study towards the beginning. Later, do absolutely as much study as you need to do to get your direction, to get your compass headed north, or headed in the direction of, you're actually right in the direction of Bodh Gaya, I think so. Heading that direction and being honest with yourself. Because if you push yourself too quickly, like if we were to say, which sometimes happens in Buddhist monasteries, unfortunately, is like you'll go in and you're like a Westerner, and then people see you and they try to make you bow. Okay, now's the time to bow. And people hate that. People hate that when you make them bow to something. And it can be harmful. Like if someone is compelling you to bow, compelling you to saying you have to respect this before you're ready, it can have a counter effect. There can be this backfire effect where, no way. It's like what, children in Buddhist countries, like there's a really sad thing which is happening in Thailand and probably in other Buddhist countries where the newer, younger generation don't have faith, don't want to go to the monasteries because they're being told to bow, but they're not being told why to bow or why the Buddha is worthy of respect. So do the research, and when you're ready, if it's worthy, bowing, or whatever gesture, giving it respect and weight.
Just one quick metaphor I think that's really helpful is to think of the Buddha as a map maker. And there's Ajahn Jayasara uses this one, and it's like you get this map and you start to realize that everything in your experience lines up with the map again and again, and over a few years you gain a lot of trust in the map maker. And then I think there is a part of giving your respect and care to it, but it's also the great tragedy of David Foster Wallace. I mean, he committed suicide in the end because the intellect will only take you so far. And sometimes we really mitigate our word of sattva. It's confidence. It's a very dry word that is palatable. But there's a real element of love in the heart for trying to find your way home in an uplift and like not shying away from that part of the path. There's something deeper in us than the intellect. And if all you can do is circle around things with the intellect and never kind of take a step off the edge, like wisdom will take you to the edge, but faith is what lets you step. And hopefully not fall. Hopefully it's Indiana Jones, with the bridge that's invisible. But yeah.
Howdy. Two thoughts. One is in terms of the meditation room at CTAC. It was actually a 7-year negotiation with the interfaith community and Port of Seattle. But 2 years ago, they put $1 million into a meditation room and a quiet room. So it's really nice. It's down, a little hard to find, it's the only bummer, but it's down underneath the A concourse, kind of where the trains go to the S terminal. And if you can find an app, you can find it. It's got 3 alcoves for the meditators. It's got 3 alcoves where you're sort of in this little private niche, which is really sweet. It's got an arrow pointing at Mecca, and it's got a rail for Christians to kneel and meditate on. And there's still continuing negotiations. There's going to be a second meditation room. It's going to be in the C concourse. They're building a building right outside the food court near there, much bigger, and it'll have foot washing for Muslims, and it'll have another meditation alcove. So that's going to be cool. And then while I'm announcing stuff, the Northwest Dharma News just went live today, or yesterday, and there's a story on Clear Mountain written by our friend Katie McKenna, and it ended up being the cover photo is the monastics lined up at the stage at Blodell Hall just because it was the best photo. That's why the cover photo happens. So anyway, it's a really nice story, and share it with your friends.
3 sadhus for Steve's good work on this one, and the sasana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, we have Daniel, and then we have
I have a question about roles, I guess. And several times staying at a monastery for a while, you start to notice, or at least I've noticed several times with monastic teachers, there have been a couple where the way that they acted toward me outside of the environment of teaching versus the way that they acted while teaching were very different. And that's something that I haven't noticed with you too. So the first was someone who was very brusque and often unpleasant to be around, but when teaching was full of metta and spoke about a lot of beautiful things. And then the second was someone who was very warm and kind, but when teaching seemed to not be listening at all to anything I asked and was very aggressive and harsh. And so I'm wondering how I can understand in my own practice, because I noticed this happening where I seem to take on a character the instant I think I'm supposed to be giving somebody advice. And I don't see this modeled in the way you guys act. And I'm wondering how I can keep mindfulness when I'm speaking to others and keep mindfulness when I see myself picking up that character role of teaching. Because I don't want to be the one who is preaching an ideal at somebody or looking at somebody as, oh, you're the fool and I'm the wise one, or something along those lines.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really kind. Yeah, I mean, we're all human, and I think it's part of this respect process of bowing down to that paradox of right view that everything is not self. So, perhaps, we have good intentions. We bow to the Buddha, but we're not yet Buddhas, and we don't always speak the most clearly. We don't always speak with the most loving kindness, or don't always experience the most loving kindness. In terms of the role of being a teacher, I think it's fascinating. It was only recently that I looked into the etymology of this other word for respect, this apatissa, or reverence is the usual translation, but literally being able to listen. And this is something that the Buddha, the great teacher, the teacher of gods and humans, as it said, this is something which he is trying to do, and something which, in my imagination of the Buddha, he would just be the best at. He's the best teacher, but he's also the best listener. And I feel like working with that paradox and leaning into maybe whichever one we need to work on. And so, I think we're all trying to find integrity in our practice, so integrity of body, speech, and mind, integrity of like how we are outside the teachings versus inside the teachings, and relating to everybody with the same loving kindness and care. But it's kind of a dance, and we're all human. So, yeah, does that touch on what you were speaking to? Looks like maybe not. Not really. No. Okay. If you wanted to clarify, maybe Ajahn Nisabo could.
That's okay. I guess more on taking the instant I see that there's advice needed or something, it's like taking on an identity of the teacher or of the person who is wise and right and needs to teach the other person. And I'm wondering more about that rather than questioning someone else's conduct, looking to my own.
I think like what Ajahn Kovilo said is like very true. And I think also a useful, the Buddha gives advice on this. He says, when one is teaching Dhamma, one might approach families or approach with the thought, may they hear the Dhamma from me, having heard the Dhamma from me, may they gain faith in me, having gained faith in me, may they show respect for me. Such a bhikkhu is not fit to teach the Dhamma. Or one may think, the Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One, apparent here and now, timeless, encouraging investigation, leading inwards to be experienced by the wise. Having heard the Dhamma, may they practice the Dhamma correctly. Such a bhikkhu is fit to teach the Dhamma. And there's so much there. The fact that like the correct way to think is to take this long moment and really recollect the Dhamma, like in full, you know, that, and then to really try to get out of the way. I think that's just relevant, and I certainly try to do that before I ever open my mouth up here. But I think another really good thing is to take on the training of asking questions. Like usually any relevant teaching, a lot of times people just need to be listened to and reflected back to. And I think almost any good teaching could be phrased as a question, and any potent moment approached with questions and curiosity rather than statements. And I think that's just a good training to explore. Like, it's pretty easy to find kind people, but very hard to find curious people. And so I think, yeah, just leaning into asking questions, because it's hard to be in the teacher role with a capital T if you're asking and genuinely curious, you know? Does that help at all as well?
Juanita? Juanita?
Namaskar, พระอาจารย์ I just want to share my experience of bowing to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. I just came back from the retreat at Goenga. At the Goenga, they don't know what doing any form of any ceremony or anything like that. But because I was get used to bowing a lot, especially when we go to Ajahn Chah tradition and Ajahn Wat Maap Chan where Ajahn Nisapo was there. Everyone we get on the cushion, we bow. Even we get out the cushion, we bow. And I was get used to that. And we first get into the Goenga meditation hall, I just bowed. And I bowed up and think of the wisdom, the purity, and the compassion of the Buddha who find us this way. And then about the second one, the Dhamma, as Ajahn Kovilo just said, explained. And about the Sangha, and I think of Ajahn Chah, Ajahn, all the Kuba Ajahn, including Ajahn Sumeto, Ajahn Nisapo, Ajahn Kovilo too. And about 3 times. It takes time before I finish bowing. Every sitting, every get out of the hall. And it's very good to start meditation. But in the end too, I bow and I found a very good benefit after sit a long hour. You can start to bend forward, low down, and keep there for a long time and come up. It's very good feeling with physical, with your back muscle too. So and I found out that to bow and think of the wisdom of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha is very good way to start meditate and end the meditation. For every time we do that, and I found it at the Goenka, which is that they're not doing all of these things, but I found out it's very bring the mind calm very quick. That's I just want to share, Ajahn. That's all.
Thank you, Juanita. I had a friend who came to the monastery and he was quite tired. He'd stayed up all night, and I looked over and he'd bowed and just stayed down, and he was just sleeping. So that's not the way to do it, but I think Juanita's got a good read. we do actually have to wrap things up. We may have time for one more, but yeah, over here. And just quickly, with all this talk of bowing, people should know it is a convention we use to use the body to train the heart, and that's all. So.
Yes. Yeah, on the subject of David Foster Wallace, yeah, I know that he struggled with a medication he was taking, and shortly before he committed suicide, he went off of the medication, and that act came out of a lot of suffering rather than merely just his intellect. And suicide's a difficult topic to talk about, because on the one hand, that person has made it sort of a choice. And I don't know, it just brings up this question for me of how do we respect people who make choices like that, which may make sense given their karma or their suffering, but feels harmful to us.
Thank you. I'd sort of said it lightly as pointing out a sort of dichotomy in my line of thinking. And I don't think it was an appropriate place to put that, because it is, you're right, a very human being, and there's a lot more going on there. So thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it, and I apologize as well. To simplify anyone's choice, and such a tragedy to something so simple is not, it's never that simple. So thank you, I appreciate it.